There is no other way to stay alive. You can't make a deal with the bloody Russian Nazi because they'll cheat you. They're gonna cheat you anyway. They're gonna promise you anything you want, and the next day they will stab you in the back. They're gonna tell you you are their brothers. They're gonna promise you peace, and they come and kill your wife, rape your wife, kill you, kidnap your children, rob your house. That's what Russia doing in Ukraine. That's what Russia doing. That's what Russia does in any land they come. Georgia, Romania, Poland, Lithuania, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Finland. Every time, anywhere Russia come in, there is tears, there is suffering, there is death of peaceful people. If the Russia come to your land, there is no law, there is no freedom, there is no election, there is no the basic human rights. And that's why Ukraine will fight. That's why Ukraine will fight, and that's why Ukraine will win. Because we are peaceful, honorable people which want to live on our land, on the land where lived our parents, our grandparents, and the land we want our children live. And only one way that to throw away bloody Russian Nazi from our land. There can be no negotiations with the terrorists. And Russia is a terrorist state. Russia is the clearly terrorist state. They are shooting civilian infrastructure. They are killing children, women into their beds on the middle of night. They are shelling civilian people, residential houses. They are shelling power plant station. They are shelling water, gas supply. They are making humanitarian catastrophe. That's what Russia brings. Nothing good Russia can bring to you. And Ukrainians know it very well. If you don't believe, look on the pictures of our cities which was shelled by Russia. Ask anybody who feel the Russian occupation, what is this? Ask Ukrainians how it to be slave in 21st century. Ukrainians know what is slavery very well. I was born in the slavery. I was born in Soviet Union when it was not cool to be Ukrainian, when it was not cool to wear this t-shirt, when it was not cool to sing our songs. My grandparents was sent into Siberia just because he was Ukrainian. My parents couldn't speak Ukrainian on the work, on the public, because they got less wages, less money. They couldn't grow up on the career. That's what Russia bring into anywhere they come in. The Russia is a terrorist state, and everybody, every country in the world should treat them as a terrorist. There is no country, there is no state. It's a terrorist organization with a bloody Putin as the ruler of this terrorist organization. The Russia is the terrorist state. 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 Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is what the Ukraine faced with the terrorists, with a great amount of terrorists, with the good armed terrorists. This doesn't matter, the arms are from Soviet Union time, which was made by our parents as well. They trade Ukraine as their land. They deny existing of Ukrainian nation. They deny of existing Ukrainian language, traditions. They deny of the right of Ukrainians to live on their house, on their land, their houses, where our ancestors live. They come in, they take in off Ukrainian flag, they torture people just for Ukrainian position. They killing people for Ukrainian symbols on their arms, for Ukrainian tattoos on the body. They killing people for the Ukrainian content in the social media. Every city which Ukrainians army were liberated, we will find huge mass graves of the victim of Russian Nazi. It's 100, it's 1,000 of people murdered by Russians. It's many of civilian car was shot by the Russian tanks. They trying to escape from the front line. They shoot any car, even if this car with a big sign, children were written on it. It's 100 victims of bloody Russian Nazi now laying in Ukrainian land. And Ukraine will never forgive bloody Russian these crimes. Ukraine will never forget it for Russians. The next 200 years, there's no one from Russia, it's my advice, don't come to Ukraine. And as a traveler, as a tourist, whatever, don't come to Ukraine. Every Russian, it's a terrorist. Every Russian, that's a homophobe. Every Russian citizen is a racist. Every Russian citizen is a terrorist, is the occupant. Because every Russian is responsible for this war. If you see the Russian cities now, there is no manifestation against the war, no meetings, no rallies. Okay, they're saying in Russia they're gonna be taken to the prison right now. But here in London, in Europe, around the world, where the people can come out on the street and say anything you think, you thought, anything. Do you see the Russian on the street saying no war? No, at least one Russian even joined here with Ukrainian to say no war. All the Russians are responsible for this. All the Russians are responsible for blood of Ukrainians. On the hand of every Russian, the hand is dirty with Ukrainian blood. All the Russian ballet is in Ukrainian blood. All the Russian vodka is on Ukrainian blood. All the Russian literature and great Russian culture, as they say, is built on the blood of millions of victims hundreds of nations which Russia was taken as slaves. The bloody Russian Nazi supposed to be isolated. The bloody Russians as a terrorist supposed to be isolated on those end of the world, on those forests and those muds, and live there in the prison, because they all the criminal. We begin from bloody Putin, from all the ministries, and every single Russian citizen who saying I don't care, it's not my business, I'm not involved in the politics, it's not my stuff. All the Russians are responsible for this war. Russia is the terrorist state. Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
More sanctions on Russia.
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 Total embargo on Russian oil.
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 Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Слава нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Захисникам України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I call for glory to Ukraine because Ukrainians are really glory nation. We are fighting for our freedom more than 600 years. It's not only 500 days of this war. It's not 9 years of this war. It's more than 600 years. The bloody Russians, whatever they call during the time, they come into our land, they robbing us, they raping our women, they kidnap our children, they put blood on our rivers, they unblood our nation, they kill the best of us, they kill poets, priests, scientists, and after some time they saying, what have you built? You built nothing, the all you have that we built to you. They first kill of our architects, of all of our scientists. They sent of millions of the best Ukrainian who don't want to be on this as a slave, who raised their voice. They were sent into Siberia. They was tortured there. They was murdered there. That's all the Russian doing in the land they come in. And Ukraine never be Russian slave again. We don't want our children who are shy, they are Ukrainians. We don't want to call ourselves Russians. We don't want to be killed as we're saying we are Ukrainians. We don't want to be shamed because we sing in our songs, we keep our traditions. We are free nations. We are free European nations. We are one of the biggest nations in Europe. We are a great nation with a big tradition. We are the same as a Poland, as a France, as a Spain, as the English people. We are same people. We are same people. We are same people as you. Our children is the same people as your children. And we want the peaceful sky for our children. You enjoy the peaceful sky just because Ukrainian army holding the bloody Russian Nazi there far on the east. And it's not so far, ladies and gentlemen. Russian missiles can come here very easily. Several hours and the London will be bombed the same as the bloody German Nazi bombed it. The Russians will be very happy to come here to your rich houses to rob it. The Russians could be very happy to come and rape your women's, to take off your children to the Russia. That's what Russians doing in Ukraine right now. And it's true. Open your eyes, wake up. They think what Russia doing now in Ukraine cannot happen in the 21st century, on the middle of Europe. It's too quiet on the European cities. It's too quiet because 200 kilometers away, it's not far. The bloody Russian killing peaceful Ukrainian children. That's all politic. That's all politic. The Russians come to our land, to our homes with no reason. Nobody called them. They come and kill us. That's what's happening. The bloody Russian. And we gonna kill every Russian who come to Ukraine with a weapon. And we have right to do it. Nobody can say, give up for Ukrainians. Nobody can right to say it. Because if we give up, we will die. If we give up at least of 1 square meter of our land, the Russian come for the other. Maybe after a year or 5 years, the Russian will come anyway. That's the bloody Russian Nazi invasion, and not just to Ukraine, just on the world. The Russian try to invade freedom. They try to take off the human rights, not just from Ukraine, from all the world. They try to invade the freedom. They try to invade life as it is. It's simple, it's not politic, it's not conflict, it's not like Russia and Ukraine find something and can't share it. It's our land, it's Ukrainian land, and no any one Russian with a weapon can be there. All the Russians who came with the weapon to Ukrainian soil gonna go 6 feet under it. Because that's our land, and it's no one reason for Russia to start this war. No one reason to take our land. No one reason to kill our children. No one reason for Russians to destroy our cities. And the Russian as a terrorist should trade as a terrorist for the governments around the world. Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is the terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Russia is a terrorist state.
Stop, Russia, stop the war.
Stop Russia,
Russia, stop the war! Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Glory to Ukraine!
Glory to heroes!
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the war in Ukraine is not over. And we are here to remind you about it. We are here to remind Prime Minister of Britain to send to Ukraine more weapons. We need more weapons to be free. We need more weapons to protect the freedom on the world, not just in Ukraine. We need more weapons to throw away occupants from our land. We need more weapons to bring peace to our homes again. Maybe it sounds a little bit weird, but your ancestors, ladies and gentlemen, they know what is fight for freedom, fight for peace. You now live in several generations in peace. You don't know what is war. All your neighbors are civilized people. All your neighbors are okay. They don't try to invade you. They come into you, you can come to them. There is no more borders in Europe. But Ukraine and many other countries has a neighbors as a bloody Russian Federation, as a bloody Russians, which is Nazi, which is clearly Nazi. They denying existing of any nation what they are neighbors. They denying of existing of Ukrainian nations, and they start the war because they say this is our land. And actually they didn't say this is our land. They just start the war without any declaration, without any words, without anything say that, like, I could understand if the Russia say, hey Ukrainians, Crimea always been our land, give up to us, give Crimea, give it back. But they didn't say even word in the time when Ukraine made order in our country, our crazy, stupid prisoner president. We didn't say about Russia in the revolution of dignity at least even one word. It was our Ukrainian revolution. We were trying to give up of corruption, to make it less. We tried to heal our brains from Soviet sickness, that you can't steal anything and stuff like this. And in time, we was most weak, the bloody Russians strike Ukraine. And it wasn't politic, it wasn't some politics games under the carpet or something. They just, with a weapon, come to Crimea and took it. They took Parliament of Crimea without any declaration, with the special forces, with a weapon, with a machine gun. They took Parliament of our land. Isn't it Nazi? Isn't it fascist? Isn't it aggression? It is. And Ukrainians know very well what Russia is. And no even one Ukrainian thinking to give up. Because we know if we give up today, tomorrow Russia come and kill us. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe next year, maybe even 5 years after. But the Russian will come, Russian will break any promises they give, Russian break everything they promise you, and Russian will kill you, Russian will rape your wife, your sisters, Russian will kidnap your children, and you will be dead. You will be dead. It's no more word, and this rally is not to entertain you. It's not just to make some show. It's just to remind you that the war on the middle of Europe in 21st century is not over, and it's far from over. Because the Russian will not stop. Russian will not stop until you, ladies and gentlemen, will afraid them. Ukrainians are not afraid Russian. We fight them because we're fighting for freedom. We're fighting for our homes. We're fighting for our children's. And we need your help, ladies and gentlemen. Ukraine needs support because Russia is much bigger than Ukraine. They had much more weapons than we have. We need weapon from the world. We need weapon from the Britain. We need weapon from America. We need all weapon you can. You don't need this weapon. Nobody want to invade Britain or France. You don't need weapon. All your neighbors are normal, adequate people. Give the weapon for Ukraine, and the peace will be on the world. Maybe you can think this war is not about you. You have nothing to this war. But every week you come into shop, you see the prices for food. Everybody you paying your bills, you see the prices. This is because the bloody Russian Nazi start the war in the world. This is Third World War, ladies and gentlemen, not less. This is Third World War, and nobody can stay beside. Nobody can just be beside. Everybody should put pressure on the bloody Russian as much as we can. Everybody who care about melting ice, about the animal, about the gay, about all the rights, you should care about Ukraine. Otherwise it's just blah blah blah, all the rights, all the things, all the animals, all the melting ice, all the things around the world. If you care about at least one of the human values, you should care about the war. You should care what Russia doing in Ukraine. Long time ago, you should care what Russia did in Georgia, in Moldova, in Syria. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, it's much easier now to help Ukraine, to send your weapon, your iron, you're just metal without soul, to send it today to Ukraine and help to throw away Russian occupants and close that portal to the monster land. Because if Ukraine fall down, the Russia come here, believe me, nobody can stay beside. This is business of all world. Our planet is too small. We are too educated. We have too much information to be beside, to sleep well, while the Ukrainian children sleeping in the bomb shelters. Ladies and gentlemen, support Ukraine, please. Take a picture of Ukrainian flag right now. Share it in your social media. Tell stop the war. Stop Russia. Make a picture of Ukrainian flag right now and support Ukraine. Do donations. If you don't want, do donation for Ukrainian military. Make donation for Ukrainian children, for refugees. Make donation for organization which fighting against ecocide in Ukrainian. As you know, the Russian, as a terrorist state, they don't fight with Ukrainian soldiers. They fighting with our power plant station, with our dump, with our nature. There is nature reserve on the south part of Ukraine, Askania Nova. It's a great, huge land with a huge amount of animal. It was like protected by the law. And when the Russian come in, there is no more this animal. They just hunt them. Askania Nova is empty. I don't tell about after they blow up Kakhovka Dam. Askania Nova is disappeared. There is not existing. That's what Russia coming. But what Russia bringing. If the Russia come to your land, there is no law, no human rights. And you can think it's far from your home. Heroям Slava! Thank you everybody who support Ukraine. We're feeling that support. We just able to fight till this time because of support of the world. Ukrainians are with open heart. They thank you for every government, every human being who at least once pray about Ukraine. But it's not enough. We need more weapon to throw away bloody Russian occupant from our land, to finish this war, to start our lives again.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised. Arm Ukraine as you promised. Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Arm Ukraine as you promised.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the biggest country in the world will promise Ukraine protection in case of war, in case of aggression. And we are here to remind about it. We demand that help. We demand that help. We don't ask, we don't beg you, we demand it because it was promised. And in 21st century, our great society can't just stay away of this war. This is middle of Europe. Ukraine is one of biggest country on Europe. And now it's under attack of the bloody Russian Nazi. The bloody Russian came again to our land and trying to make us slaves again. It will not happen, ladies and gentlemen. We will fight, and we're fighting, and we will win. And please, ladies and gentlemen, join to us, help us win, help to protect Ukrainian children, help to protect children around the world, because if the Russia will have success in Ukraine, they will make much more worse crimes. They will come to Poland, be sure they will come to Baltic country, they will take Moldova straight away. But now it's much easier to help Ukraine and stop this war, stop this shame. Because otherwise you will fight on your land with Russian. And you will remind my words today that if we together will not stop the Russian now, they will come to you. They will come to you, and the London will remember how it's to be bombed. Now Ukrainian cities are shelling by Russian Nazi. Ladies and gentlemen, help Ukraine. Speak with your MP. Speak with your Russian friends or on the war colleague if you have. We need to put as much pressure on Russia as it possible. Nobody can trade with Russia. All the embassy of Russian supposed to be close long time away. Straight up they took Crimea. Straight up they invade part of Georgia. If we let to do dictators that bloodshed today, tomorrow it will be a nuclear war. Be sure Russia will use it without any doubt, because they have nothing in their head, in their souls. They hate everything you love. The Russian hate everything you respect. The Russian hate human rights. The Russian hates everybody. The Russian hates freedom. I tell more, the Russian don't believe in freedom. If you speak with Russians, they don't believe in freedom. They don't believe the freedom exists. They don't believe. That's why they're fighting for. They want to kill all freedom and make you live as they live in there. In the Middle Ages. With no toilets, with no gas, with no human right. Thank you, Lee. Stand with Ukraine. 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 Stand with Ukraine.
Stand with Ukraine!
Stand with Ukraine! Stand with Ukraine! Arm Ukraine as you promised!
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 My friends, there is a very important topic that we need to cover now, and that is the topic of NATO. We can say a lot about why Ukraine needs to join NATO, why Ukraine needs NATO, and why NATO needs Ukraine. And to start this topic, we have our lovely speakers here, Anya.
Hi, thank you very much. Слава Україні! Слава нації! Україна! 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 Захисникам України тричі! Dear friends, I have two important messages today. Number one, as you can see, we have some lovely ladies from Women Fight for Ukraine at the front, holding the Ukraine NATO 33rd Ukrainian NATO Welcome in NATO. For some British people, for some international people, Ukrainian membership in NATO might be a controversial subject. However, Ukrainians are pledging NATO to take Ukraine on board as a member, to prevent any more death, to prevent the war. In fact, Ukrainians have been asking to become members of NATO since before 2014. If that happened, this war could have been prevented. Ukraine should have been made a member of NATO years ago. However, we're still hopeful and we're still asking NATO to invite Ukraine to join it. On 11th and 12th of July, there is going to be an annual summit of NATO in Vilnius, in Lithuania. Ukrainians all over the world are doing this initiative of asking NATO to consider Ukraine once again to take Ukraine on board. Some people might say that if Ukraine joins NATO, this could provoke Russia more. How many more provocations do we need? Russia attacked Ukraine. Russia says that's because there are NATO bases nearby. Finland was invited to join NATO. Did Russia attack Finland? It did not, but Russia is still continuing to making threats against NATO members, against the UK. Russian propaganda channels are still saying that they're going to attack the UK anyway because the UK supports Ukraine. They're threatening Poland, one of Ukraine's biggest allies. They're threatening other members of NATO. So Ukrainians' membership in NATO will not make a difference to Russia. Russia is still going to continue attacking Ukraine. However, NATO can prevent any more war because they can provide Ukraine with arms. They can provide us with military that we need to defend ourselves. I remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that sovereign Ukraine, independent Ukraine, has never initiated a single war. Ukraine has been constantly defending itself against its bloody, crazy neighbor, Russia. Ukraine is in the defense and Ukraine is simply asking for protection. And this is what NATO is there for. This is why this organization exists. It exists to protect peace. This is its main purpose. And Ukraine, being a peaceful country that is being brutally attacked by Russia since 2014, by the same Russia that attacked Georgia unprovoked, that attacked Moldova unprovoked, that keeps attacking other countries, Syria, Ukraine. How many more countries does Russia need to attack? Ukraine is now asking that NATO considers it as a member. And I'm asking all of you to say, Ukraine in NATO!
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 Arm Ukraine as you promised!
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 I'm reminding once again something that Pavlo mentioned earlier today, is that Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons as a part due to Budapest Memorandum. The guarantors, such as the United Kingdom, promised that no country will ever attack Ukraine. They promised us our sovereignty. They promised us our territorial integrity. What do we have now? We have Crimea illegally annexed in 2014. We have the war in the east going on since 2014. We have thousands of prisoners of war. We have genocide. We have children who are being illegally deported to Russia, tortured. There is evidence of torture of children. This could be prevented if Ukraine is given weapons to defend itself. You could prevent torture of children. You could prevent deportation of women. You could prevent countless of deaths just by taking Ukraine on NATO. So we're saying once again, Ukraine in NATO!
Ukraine in NATO!
Ukraine in NATO!
Ukraine is NATO!
Ukraine in NATO!
Ukraine in NATO!
Ukraine in NATO!
Ukraine in NATO!
This is going to be, that's why the signs say NATO 33rd, because this is going to be the 33rd Forum of NATO. And interestingly enough, it's going to be almost 33 years since Ukraine's independence. So now is the time, NATO, now is the time to take on Ukraine. And if protecting peace and protecting innocent people is not a good reason enough, then NATO should consider Ukraine, because Ukraine is unfortunately the only country in Europe that has the strongest army. Because Ukrainians have been forced to protect themselves since 2014. Our soldiers are currently the best, the highest quality soldiers in the entire world. All they need is arms. All they need is basic ammunition. All they need is helmets, bulletproof vests, some arms, and they will do the rest. They are protecting peace in the entire Europe with their lives. The least the world can do is help them out. Arm Ukraine now!
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 And another important message that I wanted to make today is about the prisoners of war. I'm sure many of you have seen that yesterday, funnily enough, as a birthday present for our Commander-in-Chief Zaluzhny, the Azov soldiers, the Azov commanders returned back to Ukraine. This was a big surprise for everybody. This was a big present, I'm sure, for our Commander-in-Chief and for all of those who prayed for those heroes and who waited them to be home. However, the commander of Azov, he said it himself, we still have around 2,000 prisoners of war just from Azovstal steel plant who are being kept in captivity. The images of those who are being released are horrific. They're being starved, they're being tortured, they are being subject to all kinds of mistreatment against all international laws. So despite the fact that we have some positive news and we have our heroes who are coming home, we need to continue fighting for those who are still in captivity. We need to make sure that every single one of Ukrainian heroes returns home. In fact, from Azovstal steel plant, there are still women who were cooks and who were medics who are being kept illegally in Russian jails. This violates all the laws of war, because civilians, and especially women who were just working as cooks, should not be prosecuted and should not be kept in Russian captivity. So we're asking, release the prisoners of war!
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 And one last message that we always say, world, wake up. We always say, world, support Ukraine. We're always asking for the world to continue supporting us. And of course, we're grateful, especially to the United Kingdom, to Poland, to United States for their continuous support, for providing us with arms, for providing us with humanitarian aid. Of course, we're grateful, but we need more. And we always say, world, wake up, just because the world is unfortunately not doing enough. It's providing us with aid, but we still have deaths every day. We still have Russian missiles flying in central Kiev, even in Lviv earlier this week. We still need air defense. So we're still asking the world to continue supporting us and to provide us with more air defense so that we can at least protect the civilians and our infrastructure. Air defense for Ukraine!
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 And I'm just asking, just to continue with this initiative, until 11th and 12th of July, we have time to draw the media's attention and to draw NATO's attention to the fact that Ukrainian people, being democratic, being independent people who want their voices to be heard, we're asking NATO to consider Ukraine. We want to pledge, we want to pass our message, and we want to be heard. So I'm asking everybody to continue spreading the images of Ukrainian girls, for example, holding the flag of NATO and the posters pledging for NATO to take Ukraine on board. I'm asking you to use hashtag #UkraineNato33rd and to spread the message and to let NATO and the world know that Ukraine needs to join as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Нашим славним захисникам і захисницям тричі!
Slava! 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 Thank you very much to one of our great speakers here, Anya. We have many people who have a lot to say. And they are very good speakers, some of them. You know, she in particular is a lawyer, so obviously, you know, she knows what she's saying. She knows what she's talking about. But we are welcome to all the people who are willing and able to speak on our behalf, to speak in support of Ukraine. You don't have to be a lawyer or an actor or a public speaker. You just need to have the desire and the knowledge to speak. And now I will give word to another one of our friends, Vitas.
Доброго дня, дорогі українські сестри та брати. Доброго дня всім лондонцям. Я Вітас Рудавичус, я лондонець і литовець, громадянин двох найкращих організацій світу – Європейського Союзу та НАТО. І я впевнений, що зовсім скоро Україна опиниться в одних і тих же двох клубах ЄС і НАТО. Я продовжу англійською, оскільки моя українська ще не дуже добра. So I'll go with English. As Anya has mentioned, this big NATO summit is in Vilnius, in Lithuania's capital. And I think it's symbolic why Vilnius was chosen. It's the easternmost city of NATO. You know, the border with Belarus, which is right now unfortunately occupied by Russia, is just 1 hour's drive. So the leaders of all the NATO countries, we're talking President Biden, Rishi Sunak, Macron, everyone will be there in Vilnius. They will see with their own eyes, how important this eastern flank is, and how important it is for Ukraine to become a NATO member. Actually, this hashtag Ukraine NATO 33rd, I will correct Tanya a little bit, it's for NATO 33rd country to be Ukraine. It's not the 33rd, summit. NATO next year is gonna be celebrating 75 years of its creation, so it had many more. But this is gonna be one of the crucial ones. And we Lithuanians and Latvians and Estonians, we want it to be success. And it's not just that the government wants it to be a success, the whole nation. So when leaders of those countries from around the NATO world will be arriving in Vilnius, they will be the sea of the Ukrainian flags, of messages in support of Ukraine. On the skyscrapers of Vilnius, on the city hall of Vilnius, there's a message already for a year: Putin, The Hague is waiting for you. Then in the very center where the NATO summit will be happening, there's a huge Ukrainian flag and Ukraine. What Lithuanian government is trying to do, and the same with the other Baltic nations, with Latvians and Estonians, is to push Ukraine's agenda. It's basically, we are your advocates inside of NATO, together with Poland, together with the Czech Republic, with Slovakia, because we know how much stronger the whole democratic Europe will be if Ukraine is in it. We know there are some practicalities. NATO has never ever yet accepted a member into a club while the actual hot war is still going on. So in this summit, we have to be super optimistic that Ukraine will get a full invitation. What it will get, most likely, it's a very clear roadmap, a very clear route with a very clear dates when and how Ukraine will become a NATO, that it will become a NATO for sure. My hunch is, I'm not super professional, that it's going to be in Washington summit next year, so it's going to be NATO 75 years, and then Ukraine will become a full member. What will happen in this one summit, I really hope so, that Ukraine is given all the security guarantees. So similar security guarantees which other non-NATO nations have, and we are talking security guarantees which Israel has from the US and the allies, Japan, South Korea, so strategic partners who know that if something happens, there's going to be a huge support coming their way. And just final message is, for us, we are coming here and we are here at the demos, not to forget where we are. We are outside of the Ministry of Defense, we're outside the Downing Street, and it's so important to do the political pushing here. Please write to your MPs as we remind you. Please, contact the Foreign Office ministers. They have their emails and they have their staff checking those emails. So the fact that, ordinary Londoners, and we are all Londoners here, doesn't matter whether Lithuanians or Brits or Ukrainians, they are pushing for this agenda. They are pushing for NATO to accept Ukraine. The more messages they get, the better it is. And all I finally want to say is just Slava Ukraini. Дуже дякую.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very well said, very clear cut and straight to the point. My friends, let's not chase around the bush. Let's not drag our feet. The reality is there needs to be action now to solve this situation, because this danger is not only for Ukraine. There is a danger for all of Europe and perhaps the whole world if the situation with Russia is not dealt with now, if the Russian terrorist state is not brought to responsibility as soon as possible. Unfortunately, some people still have the terrible misconception of putting NATO on the same side as unions of the sort of the Warsaw Pact or the current military alliance that Russia has with some countries that they bullied into being friends with them. The difference is, every time NATO expands, it's because the country wants to join them. NATO is above all a voluntary organization, and to join them is a voluntary choice of the country in question. Whilst Russia never asks the countries around it if they want to be in its sphere of influence, if they want to be friends with them, if they want to trade, and if they want to host their military. They never ask that. The Russians go there and they force those countries to obey. That is how they do things. That is how they practice their foreign policy, or the pathetic excuse they have that's close to it. My friends, we must be unequivocal. This is the moment in which NATO is the most useful. This is the moment when NATO will do its duty, when NATO will do what it was formed to do, when it will protect the countries of Europe against Russian incursion. As it was formed to protect the world against Soviet expansion, now it will protect us from the Russian expansion. That is unequivocal, and we must see that as reality because it is as such. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania were very wise to join NATO, because that was the only reason why Russia did not decide to invade them and subjugate them. Let's look at a little bit of history of what happened not so long ago. Russia has invaded Georgia because it was having conversations with NATO. Russia has invaded Ukraine as it was having conversations with NATO. Russia has never invaded a NATO country in the past. What's the conclusion we can make of this? The conclusion, my friends, is obvious. Russia will not invade you if you are part of NATO. Russia will not violate your sovereignty if you are part of NATO. That is reality. That is what should have happened in the past. Unfortunately, it hasn't. But there is still time to solve this situation now. And we must show our support for Ukraine to join NATO as soon as humanly possible, and for the terrible crimes of the Russians to be finally punished. Stop Russia, stop the war!
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 And now, my friends, I will give word to our friend Tommy Three Flags. I'll just borrow his 2 flags for a short while.
Thank you, Pablo. Pablo said, sometimes when we go on counter rallies, we hear voices against NATO, as if that is all that's bad. But I ask you, I've been lucky enough to go to Poland myself, and citing that as an example. If Poland is an example of a NATO country that used to be in the Warsaw Pact, I have not discovered any anti-NATO sentiment in Poland. If Poland is an indication of what countries, of how people feel about being in NATO, you will not find any anti-NATO sentiment in Poland any more than you will find a so-called Stop the War rally in Moscow. But like I said, so hopefully, yes, this will be, that Ukraine will finally be able to join NATO. But another country whose conduct I think has been hypocritical and disgraceful is that of the government of Serbia. Sometimes I'm not sure, I'm not saying that every Serbian individual I've encountered thinks that way, but there seems to be a strong amount of support for Putin and the invasion in Serbia. Now, the hypocrisy is astonishing, especially bearing in mind that I don't know of any so-called historical friendship between Serbia and Russia, bearing in mind that Serbia was lucky enough not to have been in the Warsaw Pact or been a satellite of Moscow. Maybe I can only hypothesize perhaps they tried to do their own mini USSR in the Balkans. So, like I said, a new word for hypocrisy would be Serbia, And like I said, he is hoping that Ukraine becomes a member of NATO. Like I said, the sooner the better, and you'll have no more rubbish talks about being demilitarized or neutral. Being a proverbial sitting duck at Moscow's mercy. And whether you like NATO or not, it's up to Ukraine to decide what it wants to do. So, like I said, he's hoping that that they give a definitive date. Personally, the sooner Ukraine is a member, the better. So, thank you. Slava Ukraini. And
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense!
For Ukraine.
Air defense!
For Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine!
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine!
Air defense for Ukraine.
Air defense for Ukraine!
Ukraine!
Понад усе.
I'm gonna speak in English so more people can understand me. I just want to draw your attention to the difference between perspectives in language. For Ukraine, language is power. It's our culture, it's our identity. For Russians, language is a weapon that's been weaponized since the break of USSR. Because as I grew up, I didn't grow up in Ukraine, I visited it a lot, but I grew up in Latvia. And in early 2000s, the very premise that is used right now by Russia to invade Ukraine and to say that Russian language and Russian-speaking people are being abused by Ukrainians. I was a witness as a teenager in school in early 2000s that Latvia introduced exams and certain levels of language that needs to be spoken by any Russian-speaking or anyone else to become Latvian and to work and to function in society, which is Europe. Every day you go to work in England, which language do you use? Do you use your own language and play a victim that why they can't let me speak my own language at work? Language is a power, and for Russians it's a weapon. Why did not they invade Latvia or the Baltic states for the very same premise? Because they are in NATO. They are scared of NATO, yet they say that we are not fighting Ukraine right now. This is why it's been going on for 501 days now. We are fighting NATO. They would not stand a week against NATO, because those who are in able males are running away to Georgia, the very country they invaded in 2008, They ran away to Kazakhstan, the very country they ridiculed for decades of being subhumans in their comedy, in their movies, all of their culture. Ukrainians, Georgians, Abkhazians, Eastern Europeans, especially Estonians, they ridicule them and they use their language as a weapon, They say that the Russian-speaking people are being mistreated. If Russian-speaking people do not want to adopt the culture and the very language of the country that they choose around the world, they shouldn't be there. Then move. If you don't want to speak the language of the country that you're in, as I am speaking right now in English in UK, then you should not be in that country. If you play a victim, then you should not be a victim while holding a gun in Ukraine and saying, I've been forced to be here. You can't be a victim and a murderer. You can't be a rapist and a victim at the same time. You can't be a murderer and a victim at the same time. Or they would put me in prison. Look to your left, look to your right, the Russian army. You have Wagner Group. Guess where they came from? They came from prison to kill in Ukraine. Yet you say you're afraid of prison. Yet you are in ranks with those who are in prison. When people say that Russians and Ukrainians are the same, it's like it's so nonsensical, because we use our language as our power. This is our identity, and they weaponize language. And I want to say, stop Putin, stop the war!
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 Help Ukraine protect peace!
Help Ukraine protect peace!
Help Ukraine protect peace!
Help Ukraine protect peace!
Слава Україні!
Thank you very much, my friend. We welcome people from all over the world to come here and to show us their support. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And to speak their message. Because our fight is not only fought in Ukraine. Our fight is a fight for freedom, a fight for a better future, a fight for a future with less wars and with more peace and with more diplomacy. We, however, can't have diplomacy with a country who breaks the agreements as soon as they are made. We can't have diplomacy with a country that tries to use that diplomacy and the trust that is placed upon them only to backstab the countries who are making those agreements with them. We can't have that. We can't have that, ever. We have made that mistake in the past. We must never make that mistake in the future. And that is where NATO comes in. Sometimes, so-called appeasers have asked us, well, what if Russia uses nuclear weapons? What if Russia does that? Well, indeed, my friend, it is a dangerous situation. But we need to realize a very important fact. The only reason why Russia has not yet used nuclear weapons is because of the absolute and unequivocal threat of force that NATO presents. The NATO, the US, and all the other countries who will hold Russia responsible if Russia uses nuclear weapons against them. Russia claims the Anglo-Saxon world is their enemy number one. Russia claims the US is the great evil of this world. Why is it then that Russia is not threatening to use nuclear weapons against the US? Why is it that they haven't done so already if they're so eager to do it? Because, my friends, Russia has not used those nuclear weapons, not because they are wise enough to do it, but because they are afraid. And they know that even if they use them, they would still lose, and they would still be held accountable. Yes. If Russia was more powerful than the US, they would have used those nuclear weapons 100%, with no question. Let's imagine what that logic would look like in practice. The logic of the perpetual appeasers, of the individuals who claim that if only Ukraine gives up more and more and more of its land, then that will make Russia stop. What if one beautiful day Putin wakes up and takes a flight to Washington, D.C., walks into the White House and says, now I am in charge here? Imagine the reaction to that. They would tell him to simply leave. To which Putin would reply, but I have nuclear weapons. I can do what I want. And if you try to stop me, I'm going to use them. And then the Americans would reply, well, we have nuclear weapons too. Are you sure you want to do this? In the logic of the perpetual appeasers, Putin would be right in the end, because he will say, I am the madman, and thus my demands need to be respected. What kind of logic is that, my friends? That is taking the logic of the appeasers to the maximum extreme. That is what they are entailing by their points. And their points, my friends, are hollow. They have nothing else except Russian propaganda. And we must be better than that. We must see through those arguments. We must see through the lies so that we can explain to the whole world what those lies are and what the truth is. So that the whole world knows it. And so that every person can make an informed decision on how they want to act and what they want to do for the future. How they want to live. Whether they want to be living as slaves, as cattle with Russia, or as free men and women with the West. That is the real choice, my friends. The only choice that matters right now. The choice between living with a choice and living without that choice. Because people can choose to never be able to choose again. People can choose to sacrifice their free will. But we should never do that. We should choose freedom. We should choose a future. We should choose peace and diplomacy. Russia has never chosen that peace and diplomacy. Russia has always chosen threats, war, and genocide. That is the only way they can convince anybody at all to agree with them. Anybody at all to allow their troops into their country. With manipulation, subversion, and threats. And a lot of blackmail. Let's not forget about how Russia blackmailed the West for years with their gas and with their oil and all of the other commodities, all of the other fossil fuels the Russians were providing. Let's never forget about that. Let's not ignore the fact that a lot of Russian tanks have written on them to London, to Berlin, to Washington, and their missiles too. A simple joke? Could be so. But the truth of the matter is, they are not neutral, not to this country, not to the US, and certainly not to Ukraine. And these individuals who ask for neutrality out of Ukraine, has Russia chosen neutrality to Ukraine? Has Russia chosen neutrality to the West? Never. Russia has always been a sworn enemy to the West, a sworn enemy to democracy, a sworn enemy to freedom. That has always been their choice. In the Soviet Union, after the Soviet Union, and before the Soviet Union. It has always been the choice of the Tsardom of Muscovy, the great kleptocracy, the country-sized criminal syndicate, and the Khanate of Muscovy, of which Putin declares himself the Führer. Because of course, Putin wants to bring back the past instead of moving into the future. How can we live on this planet if the only thing that some leaders of this world want is to bring back the past? How can we live if Putin is returning to medieval ideologies? Because indeed, it was in the Middle Ages that people were getting burned for being declared witches and Satanists. Putin is openly claiming that one of the main reasons for his invasion of Ukraine was the purpose of desatanizing Ukraine. A modern day witch hunt. Absolutely ridiculous. Imagine a modern country making an excuse of Satanism. And that's their excuse for invading another country. Absolutely insane. And indeed, vast majority of the people who still side with Russia are the insane. They are the soft of mind and weak of spirit who are giving in to the Russian propaganda. And that is why we must not be silent, my friends. We must speak and we must debunk these ideas. We must face our opposition head on wherever we go. And remember, every single one of us can make a change as soon as we try to do it. As soon as we stop making excuses and start thinking of solutions. And our solution right now is to come here and support Ukraine as much as you can. Our protests happen every Wednesday at 6 o'clock, every Saturday at 4 o'clock, every Sunday at 3 o'clock, as we're having it today. Our protests last for 2 hours, and they always happen here in 10 Downing Street. Furthermore, I would encourage any person who's hearing this to follow the Instagram page of Support Ukraine London. We have all the schedules there for this event and for many other events. And after this event, I would encourage anybody who wants to have some practice in public speaking to come with me to Speaker's Corner. Because that is a very important place and a great place to train and to learn how to speak, especially with our opposition. And now, my friends, we will have a minute of silence for all those who have fallen and who have suffered with this terrible crime committed against the Ukrainian people. Thank you very much. And thank you for your support, sir. But you don't have to kneel, sir. Thank you very much for your fine support. You know, because we are not like Russia. We don't need people to kneel. We never ask for that. We want to treat others with respect and as equals. As people who cooperate with us, as allies. Russia treats the others as subordinates and as slaves. That's exactly how they act to every single country that is friendlier to them. And friendlier they are, not because they want to be, but because Russia forces them to do so. Imagine if Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania and Poland did not join NATO. Imagine what excuses the Russians would make to invade those countries too. Because indeed, there's a lot of Russian speakers in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania. There's even some ethnic Russians. Russia would have a field day with that. They would make every excuse in the book to invade those countries also. But they haven't. And why haven't they? Because of what we have said many times in the past. The only way to negotiate with Russia is to make sure that Russia knows that to break negotiations will result in inevitable and catastrophic consequences for them. Accountability is the only way we have of making Russia pay for what they have done in the past. Because as long as we use these appeasement tactics, as long as we keep giving an inch to Russia, they will always take a mile and many, many more miles after that. Let's make a short list of some of those broken agreements, of some of those atrocities the Russians have committed. The Ukrainians have signed the Budapest Memorandum, the biggest nuclear demilitarization in human history, giving up the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world back then. All of it to Russia, in exchange of a promise of non-aggression. Ukraine has also signed the friendship agreement with Russia, with exactly the same result. Ukraine has signed the 2 Minsk agreements with Russia, both of them violated by the Russians, the second one on the same day as it was signed. How can we sign more agreements with Russia, my friends? I ask you. Can anybody who wants supposedly to achieve peace via negotiations with Russia, can anybody explain what we should do for Russia to keep their word? Because they certainly will not keep it if there are no consequences for their current actions. Russia has invaded Georgia with exactly the same excuses they've made at their first invasion of Ukraine in 2014. Exactly the same conversation of Nazis, of Georgia attempting to invade Russia supposedly, and of course, of an extermination of the Russian speakers and the ethnic Russians. Of course, small Georgia would declare war against Russia and go to war against them with an expectation of victory. It's ridiculous. It's pathetic. It's embarrassing that some people would actually believe in it. And yet that insanity still exists. We are here to oppose that insanity. We are here to tell the world how things are and the better way of moving forward. Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава!
Slava нації!
Смерть ворогам!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Україна!
Понад усе!
Героям України тричі!
Слава! Слава! Слава!
And now, my friends, we will end this protest in the same way as we have started, with the lovely Ukrainian anthem. Let's go.
згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануєм і ми, браття, у своїй сторонці, душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду. Душу й тіло ми положим за нашу свободу і покажем, що ми браття козацького роду.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава!